Maintaining readiness during the pandemic lockdown is a challenge for the military and the police due to the nature of its work. Over in cyberspace, cyber threats have continued to grow rapidly at a global scale. The advancement of technologies continue to pose threats to national defense and security, health services, emergency services, banking and finance, governments, etc. And so guys, we will wrap up this morning with a panel that will be discussing on why a good offense is the best defense when it comes to combating the post-pandemic world. Our first esteemed guest of this panel is the Acting Chief Executive of Malaysian Institute of Defence and Security, also known as MiDAS, Encik Noor Hisham bin Rosle. He has been with the Ministry of Defence since 2003 and has experience mainly in defence diplomacy at both multilateral and bilateral defence cooperation, particularly at the ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting. Our next esteemed guest of this panel has been serving the Malaysian government since 2004. For the past 15 years, Puan Shariffah Rashidah has been actively involved in formulating, coordinating, and monitoring the national cybersecurity policies development and implementation. And this includes the development of the National Cyber Crisis Management Plan of Malaysia, the National Cyber Coordination and National Cyber Coordination and Command Center, and the Malaysia Cybersecurity Strategy 2020 to 2024. Our third guest of this panel is the UNODC's Cybercrime and Cryptocurrency Advisor and Regional Coordinator for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Prior to UNODC, Alexandru Caciuloiu was Digital Crime Officer with Interpol Global Complex for Innovation. Alex is originally from Romania, and in 2007, he joined the Romanian National Police in the Counter-Organized Crime Brigade as a cybercrime investigator. Our fourth guest of this panel is dialing in all the way from the US. In her role with the US Department of Justice, Kristi O'Malley is responsible for implementing capacity building programs on cybercrime and digital evidence for judges, prosecutors, investigators, policy officials, and digital forensic analysts throughout Southeast Asia. In 2020, she received the U.S. Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service for her role as a part of a team who disrupted child exploitation communities on the dark web. Lastly, but not least, the panel moderator. Asohan Aryaduray is Senior News Editor at Star Media Group. He was previously the editor of the Star's popular In Tech Pullout until 2005, before being posted to Bangkok as an editor of the Asia News Network. In 2012, he formed Digital News Asia with other technology journalists before returning to the Star in 2016 to assume his current position. This is definitely a great, power-packed international panel discussion that you will want to pay full attention to. And remember, if you have any questions for the panel, please do post it in the chat box or in the comment section below. So, how's the panel doing? Are you guys ready to talk about defense?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'm not going to delay anymore. I'm very, very delighted. Whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Without much further ado, thanks for that very awesome introduction, Mira. And I think we'll just get straight to it. Our panelists have already been introduced, but now I'm going to invite each one of them to talk more about what their roles and responsibilities are, and what their functions in this new environment is. I would like to start with Noor Hisham of MiDAS. Can you tell us more about MiDAS, what it does, and what your roles are and responsibilities are?
Thank you, Asohan. Well, basically, MiDAS, as the name suggests, is it's the Institute of Defence and Security, which is actually established back in 2010. It's actually a derivative that comes out of the ASEAN Defence Ministers meeting, where it was suggested that the whole members of ASEAN should have a dedicated institute that's addressing issues of defense and security, particularly feeding the regional dynamics. So that's how we came to being, and ever since, our primary function is actually advising policymakers, and though we are directly funded by the ministry, but we do have some leeway of working with the Track 2 organizations, and so for having said that, we are not naturally just bound by what government or the ministry wish to do, but we are free in suggesting what should be or what should not be in our defense, basically defense agenda. So we also work together with the whole network, which is called the ASEAN Defense Institute Network, and which basically meets almost every about twice a year, and we become basically, as I said, playing the advisory role for policy or any initiatives to be taken, either at the national or the regional level.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we're going to take a 1-minute break to clear up some glitch. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere, anyone. We are back, and thank you, Noor, Hisham, for introducing yourself and for telling us more about what MiDAS does. Now I move on to Shariffah. Can you tell us about NACSA and what it does, and how is it different from, say, MiDAS and other cybersecurity agencies like CSM? What is your role and responsibility?
Thank you very much, Asohan. Very good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me here as a panel for this session. To answer the question, National Cybersecurity Agency is an agency that was established in 2017. It started with a small division in National Security Council. It started somewhere in 2004, 2005, where at that particular point of time, the discussions that any attack to critical infrastructure would affect the national security or will affect the country. So that was the first, I think, decision in 2004 under the UN, the GGE. So that was when the government of Malaysia decided to establish a small unit to look into that. As time goes from 2004, 2005, 2006, until a point where the governments see the movement, not only Malaysia, I think all over the world, there should be an entity to govern cybersecurity, hence where NACSA being established. So as per NACSA, our main objective and the main roles and responsibility is to formulate, coordinate, and monitor cybersecurity environment. And as Malaysia, we really recognize there are multi-stakeholder in the cybersecurity environment. So in particularly in part of the government, in the cyber environment where other government agencies involved, there are a lot of cross and coordinated works that needs to be done. So for NACSA, we have actually introduced the National Cybersecurity Strategy, a strategy that would outline what Malaysia would do in navigating cybersecurity for the next 5 years. The fundamental focus for that policy is a whole of government, recognizing public and private sector, is a concerted effort. It also recognizes all the entity in cybersecurity. So if I may explain a little bit further, at the top of the government of Malaysia in terms of cybersecurity, policy and governance and coordination, we have NACSA. And as the function of NACSA being resides under National Security Council to formulate, coordinate and monitor national security issue, NACSA will focus on cybersecurity matters. And for NACSA, if we look into the cybersecurity matters per se, we also have two channels or two entities or two domains that we focus on. If we traditionally look into the security matters, for agencies that traditionally in charge of security matters, cybersecurity becoming another domain in security. In this regard, this matter can be divided into three things, I think, three subsets of cybersecurity. One is cybercrime, second is cyber in terms of military, thirdly is cyber diplomacy. And for cybercrime, we have the law enforcement agencies, we have the Royal Malaysian Police that focus on the Computer Crime Act. We also have the Malaysian Multimedia and Communication Commission, MCMC, that look into the Communication and Multimedia Act. We also have other LEAs, agencies and regulators, such as Ministry of Domestic Trade, Consumers Affairs, Security Commissions, Company Commissions of Malaysia, and as well as Central Bank of Malaysia. And in terms of military and defense, we have Ministry of Defense and the agencies that have under there. And our Malaysia Armed Forces is the government organ that work together with the NSC and NACSA, especially to monitor, manage, and mitigate when an incidences escalate to the next level. Next level here means that when incidents affect our national security, sovereignty, there are SOP that will be activated. The third one is cyber diplomacy, where NACSA works closely together with Ministry of Foreign Affairs in order for us to protect our sovereign right as a country, as well as demonstrate our responsibility to uphold our obligation, Malaysia's obligation, to international peace and security. The ecosystem of cybersecurity does not just confine to the pure security domain. Cybersecurity is also a social and economic issues. Hence, we have other government agencies that are involved in cybersecurity work. We have MDAC that work closely together with us in terms of capacity and capability building of talent, in terms of industry development. And we also recognize that cybersecurity should be embedded at the early stage. The Malaysian Administrative Modernization and Management Unit, MAMPU, that is responsible to lead the public sector ICT development and digitalization, also play parts and roles in embedding cybersecurity in the development of ICT in public sector. Same goes to the Ministry of Communication and Multimedia, our KKMM, that look into the development of ICT for Malaysia as a whole. We also have Cybersecurity Malaysia, as mentioned by Asohan, a company that is under the government of Malaysia that was established to support in terms of providing technical assistance. There are so many stakeholders in the cyber environment, but for NACSA, our focus to ensure that the formulation, coordination, and monitoring of cybersecurity initiative in Malaysia are concerted, being the resources are optimized, and no duplication, and recognize the roles and responsibility, be it public sector as well as private sector.
Okay, thank you. I think you've also answered my first question that I was going to ask, which is, you brought up duplication of efforts. I think you've already addressed that issue. Thank you. But since you brought up cyber diplomacy, when you were talking about cyber diplomacy, I kept looking at Alex, which I think now is your turn to introduce yourself. And does cyber diplomacy also involve you? Because I think you worked with some of our panelists before in some of your districts. So can you please introduce yourself and expound on this cyber diplomacy issue?
Definitely. Well, my name is Alexandru Caciuloiu. You can call me Alex. It's easy for everybody. So I'm with the United Nations Office on Drug Crime. Been working now. I was previously with Interpol, based in Singapore. So I've been in the region for almost 8 years now. And yeah, I think it's great that Shariffah mentioned all the different agencies that are involved in the cyber field, right? Cyber diplomacy, I think, in its wider term, refers to how governments and states, but also industry actors, work together to advance their interests and influence in the cyber field, and that can relate to designing new technologies, but also coming up with new types of regulation to support them in that space. And also it relates to how the existence of norms and regulations on the international in the international environment that guide states and actors to what action they can take, or on the contrary, discourage them from taking certain measures or actions in the cyber field. But I think also it relates more narrowly to how states position themselves around crimes committed in the cyber field. Do countries have the best understanding of what the current threats are? Do they have the proper regulation in place? Do they have the proper government structure, agencies and authority? Do their government officers have the proper knowledge, understanding, and tools to operate on these threats? And are they able to do so while obviously also respecting the human rights of their citizens, right? Enshrined in the UN charters and other international documents to which obviously the states are parties to. So in that sphere, this is kind of where I work here in the region with the countries, and obviously Malaysia has been a strong partner of Unodc throughout this process. So we work with countries in the region to support them in kind of navigating this, I would say, very complex field. We provide support, we provide capacity building, but also we provide guidance on how to deal with these matters. More, I think, about the UN's role in this field. I think that you may know that the UN was essentially designed at the end of World War II, and with the main purpose to basically stop a World War III from happening, right? So its main attribute is to foster peace and to stop countries from engaging into another large-scale conflict. And I think this role is as relevant in the cyber field nowadays as it is in the offline world. As we know, the cyber field is essentially enabling all our new, our current and evolving societies to exist. We have, critical infrastructure, we have internet services, we are basically connected all the time. So it's easy to understand how conflict in the cyberspace can very easily, and actually does very easily, spill over into the physical space, right? So from that perspective, the UN also is looking now closer to how it can guide states and support them and prevent conflict from erupting in the cyberspace. So the UN has been engaging more and more in this field, and actually through its member states, the member states can propose through the General Assembly, a meeting that happens every year with all the UN member states. Member states can propose that the UN looks closer into, a particular area, such as the cyberspace, and how governments can work closer to support each other and to establish a global set of rules that they can all abide to, so that we have security in the cyberspace. So we've had several of these mechanisms ongoing, called Governmental Group on a Cyberspace. So we've had several working groups with different governments coming together, looking at how state behavior in cyberspace should go on. So I think through the UN processes, we see that generally states agree that there has to be a certain type of behavior that should be acceptable in cyberspace. But as always, I think the devil is in the detail, right? So while a lot of generally all the governments agree that there should be certain type of behavior, and international humanitarian law does apply to states' behavior in cyberspace. How do we apply these measures, or how do we measure what happens? So there are various kind of opinions around that. But I think another key point that states actually do agree on is that we should have more capacity building, more confidence building measures in the cyberspace. So we should all work together as governments, work with each other, so that we have better regulation and we are better able to identify crimes and wrongdoings in the cyberspace and work together to address these issues. So I think this is where my agency, Unodc, also has a more stronger role to play. we work with countries to support them to address and to identify cyber crimes and to build this capacity. So this is kind of how it ties into the wider picture.
Okay, thank you. Finally, we go to Kristi. Thank you for joining us all the way from the US. Can you tell us more about what your work, your role here entails? And, you know, just working this, the theme of today is what do you mean by offense is the best kind of defense when it comes to cybersecurity?
Sure. So I am a Department of Justice prosecutor. I have been for 11 years. I've prosecuted all different kinds of cases, including cybercrime, child exploitation, and cyber-enabled crime. And we have had, the United States Department of Justice has placed a prosecutor in Malaysia since 2015 to work on capacity building, both in Malaysia and throughout Southeast Asia, specifically on cybercrime, cyber-enabled crime, and digital forensics and digital evidence. And so I agree with Alex, and we actually, our organizations partner often, as we do with multiple of the stakeholders in the region, to come together to combat this problem, because we recognize from a government perspective, the United States, as I know Malaysia does and other countries do as well, that we cannot fight cybercrime alone. The criminals don't know borders, and so we have to work collaboratively in order to be able to combat cybercrime. And so our focus is on training prosecutors, police, policymakers, judges in the areas of cybercrime, cyber-enabled crime, digital forensics. We also work on legislative reform issues, on case-based mentoring, and work closely with U.S. law enforcement placed throughout the region who work operationally with our counterparts on cases as well. So our goal is to have a global network. We have people placed in 12 different countries that work together as a network to be able to combat cybercrime. In terms of the best offense being a good defense. Yeah, I think there's. I sort of look at it from three different levels. What can governments do? What can organizations do? And what can individuals do in order to have that good defense? And for governments, certainly increasing capacity of those that are involved in combating cybercrime, in having the appropriate legislation, in joining the world community in networks that exist to fight cybercrime. For example, there's a Council of Europe Convention on Cybercrime that many countries around the world are already members of. And I know NACSA and many people have heard me talk with them about this issue many times. But it's a treaty specifically addressing cybercrime in particular. And so we encourage all countries to be members of it because it provides tools and networks for us to work together in combating cybercrime that already exists. So that's one way governments can be prepared to engage in the treaties and networks that already exist. Another is obviously having strategies in place, such as the cybersecurity strategy that Malaysia just recently adopted, so that the individual entities, and Shariffah named many of them, are coordinated together to work on this issue, so that they can we have the same issues in the United States. We have multiple different agencies that work on cyber issues. So having that coordination is key. So that's from a government perspective, I think some of the main areas. From an organizational perspective, I think it's a question of when will there be a cyber attack or a cyber incident involving your company, not if. And so being prepared ahead of time to know what you can do when a cyber incident hits. For example, all organizations should have identified mission critical data and institute a tiered process to protect that data, whether that's having redundant systems where the data exists so that if you get hit with a ransomware attack, you don't lose access to all of your data by the system being shut down. Having an actionable incident response plan where everyone knows what they're supposed to do if they come to work one day and you turn on your computer and you have no access to any of your files. having the technology and the procedures in place ahead of time, and then building relationships with the people that are going to be investigating any cyber incidents, whether that's the police, different public officials, public relations firms, private industry, cybersecurity firms, having those relationships in place already, and then having legal counsel and internal individuals already knowledgeable about how to combat those incidents. And then, finally, for individuals, we all are constantly under attack every day and constantly being threatened by cyber incidents. And so just being aware, having the training, whether you do it personally or whether you do it as part of your work. I go through, I think, 3 or 4 trainings a year, it feels like, in the Department of Justice makes us go through to be aware, that you should not be taking at this point, unsolicited emails, phone calls, text messages, should not be clicking on links, in any of those. I'm hyper paranoid about looking at the, behind the sender of any email. I never would click on a link or, if it's asking for financial information or anything like that, I would, go to my bank's website or call up the bank directly. And so being aware that you shouldn't trust blindly the information you're seeing, and that every day people are engaged in phishing campaigns and trying to find vulnerabilities among individuals who either are looking for a quick buck, winning the lottery, looking for romance, looking for are desperate or think they're required to pay taxes or going to be arrested. There's lots of play on people's fears and vulnerabilities. And so just heightening that public awareness that we are all constantly being hit with these, social engineering attempts, and protecting yourself and being aware of them is the key way to protect yourself to do that. So those are sort of initial thoughts on, going from the government to the organization to the individual level, how we can put on a good defense.
Okay, so basically it's being prepared for the worst.
Yes.
Taking the steps to be prepared for the worst, even though you wish it never happens to you. No, Hisham, can I ask you? So I think the Defense White Paper goes into effect this year. Can you tell us more about it and how national security concerns have evolved over the years to now include cybersecurity as a key element of any national security agenda and policy?
Right. Certainly. Thank you, Asohan, for the question. Well, basically, when you're talking about defense now, what we have planned is actually what has been set, in line with the parameters set in the Defense White Paper. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's clearly stated there is actually, I know the fundamental principle is about in the defense is actually embracing technology. Yeah. So these are the things that we have highlighted, among others. There are 5 defense principles, but basically activating defense science and technology and innovation and integration. Yeah. So that also entails the whole capability development program. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that leaves you not only addressing, it's just that, like what Shariffah said it earlier, the traditional domain has been that land, air, maritime, mm-hmm. and now we add cyber to it. So it's just that these days, everything, land, air, or maritime, are connected, are encapsulated into cyber. Mm-hmm. So these are the things that, fundamentally, we agreed that there are 4 domains, but maybe, as it evolves, everything in a way is being encapsulated in cyber. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So what does the white paper says actually? The white paper, what's important is it's going to be the policy and strategic direction of the defense of the country for the next 10 years. Yeah? So anything we plan basically must be within that parameter. Mm-hmm. And And secondly, what the white paper really stressed on is about leveraging on capitalizing the resources, leveraging on resources, either across the government and across society. I think Alex has put it earlier that that's what we would try to focus on. So bringing cybersecurity in perspective, what we need to bear in mind is actually it must take the normal traditional concerns that we are responsible with, either traditional threat or non-traditional threat. So these issues, we do know for a fact that cyber makes it more, the cyber environment makes it more difficult. But at the same time, we still need this human intervention or normal traditional military assets that needed to be put out there. So this is where we need to be careful. We cannot be overly excited focusing on one area without looking at the overall view, the overall view of our national security threats.
Yeah, so it seems like everything now has to be holistic, and we're not just talking about a whole of government approach. It has to be a whole of nation approach.
Exactly.
Okay. Just to, and Shariffah, either you or Noor, Hisham can address this. A lot of critical infrastructure in this country sit in the private sector. Can you just give us an inkling of how you address these issues? When do you work closely with the regulators covering these industries? Do you have joint trainings with the private sector to make sure that our critical infrastructure is not affected?
If I may respond, for your kind informations, and I think most of the critical information infrastructure sectors and agencies that we have engaged actually understand this particular matter. Prior to the development of cybersecurity strategy, we have a national cybersecurity strategy that really focus on the protection of critical information infrastructure. The strategy was developed in 2006, I think, and implemented somewhere in 2008. Why it was developed at that point of time to focus on critical infrastructure? Because that was how the cybersecurity landscape at that point of time. In Malaysia, we have 10 critical national information infrastructure, starting from the government, transportation, finance sector, agriculture. We also have transportation, information and communication, and much more, emergency services and others. So under the CNII, we have the sector lead. Sector lead is the regulators or ministries that have the authority under the agencies. So the sector leads are the government agencies or regulators. Under the sector leads, they are being recognized as the private sector who usually owning the asset. For example, in our financial sector, under the CNII, we recognize our Central Bank of Malaysia as the sector lead. They actually have the regulatory power to all the banks in Malaysia. So we do that, the escalation, recognizing public and private sector. One. And secondly, from the initiative itself, we developed the National Cyber Crisis Management Plan. The plan actually indicated and being translated into our directive number 24, that how a country policy and mechanism in terms of managing cyber crisis. So how do we do that and encourage the critical infrastructure? We actually do the national cyber drill every year, starting from just 10 agencies, it escalated until 100 agencies. So from there, they actually understand at national level, what is our national threat level and how do we connect to them. We also develop our our National Cyber Coordination and Command Center, a center that actually connected with another 4 cyber operation center to collect information, to collect logs, to actually handle reports and incidences with all our identified point of contact under the critical national information infrastructure, be it from the government sector as well as from the private sector. So that is how we connect with the critical national information infrastructure sectors as well as agency, be it public or private. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add anything to that, no, Hisham?
Well, we can add on by saying that since we had the defense white paper, what comes out of it is the Defense Cyber Electromagnetic Division, which recently launched. And also prior to that, we had the Cyber Defense Operations Center, CDOC. And they've been working together with in line with the Malaysian cybersecurity initiatives.
Okay, thank you. Since now I'd like to go to Alex and Kristi. And I think, Kristi, you were talking about child exploitation rings and all that. And, Alex, you may not, I think you both were out of the country. Kristi, you had already left for the US when this big story just broke over a few days ago, where there was this serial pedophile who was captured after Malaysian and Australian police worked very closely together to track him down. He had been posting stuff on the dark web. They traced and tracked him down. Can you tell us more about how, in today's world, cross-border cooperation, how important it is, and what needs to be done to deepen this kind of engagement? I'd like to start with you, Kristi, because I think you've got stories to tell.
Well, the case that was mentioned in my introduction that I won an award last year for actually was a cross-border case. The defendant was in Ireland, had servers out of France that hit on Las Vegas, that traveled around the world. And so it required international cooperation in order for us to be able to identify that this individual was hosting servers that hosted the largest amount of child pornography that we had seen ever up to that point. And so I think it highlights that we all definitely have to work together. Very often you have a target in one country and victims in other countries, or victims in multiple countries, because the internet doesn't know any borders and you can reach victims around the world. And so we are dependent as law enforcement on the cooperation of law enforcement entities in those other countries to help identify victims, to identify targets, and to build the case together. No one of us can do it alone. We have US law enforcement and the Australian and New Zealand law enforcement work very closely on these child exploitation cases with the Royal Malaysian Police's D11 unit that handles those cases. And the goal is really to save children and work together and make the internet a safer place. And so I think we can all get behind that. And, we're always happy to collaborate very closely to make sure that we do everything possible to put together the best possible case.
Okay. Alex, can you tell us more about, I know we keep going back to cyber diplomacy, which can't be helped because you're with the UN. So, but can you tell us about the kinds of initiatives that the UN has to tackle these kind of cross-border criminal rings?
Sure. I think I just complement what Kristi was saying, and obviously the other panelists, that cyber is essentially, the cyber environment is borderless, right? While in our countries, we can see right now we can't travel, there is quarantine, we're stuck in a whatever. From the computer, from the internet, you can just reach anywhere in the world, right? And criminals know this and have been taking advantage of this for a very long time now. And it's taking quite some time to catch up. Now everybody understands that we need to work together. But we also need to have these confidence building measures so that countries trust each other when they talk. I think this is where the UN comes and can help is not the only one, obviously, you know, where there are many different mechanisms and many different agencies and even the private sector. Cooperation is important on not only state to state and of course agency to agency, but also from government to the industry and to academia and to society. Because as I think the mentioned at the beginning, you know, the internet is essentially a critical infrastructure, right? And a lot of the infrastructure is owned or, you know, maintained by the industry, by private industry. So then we have to, you know, have these conversations with them and really have, you know, develop a good working relationship and kind of a bond with the industry and with civil society, because we can't address it from a government perspective only.
Okay, thank you. Back to you now, Hisham, sir. We've been talking about a lot of, you know, NACSA does a lot of training, Unodc does a lot of training and all. How important it is now? I know you with the national security side about sovereignty and all that, but now we've established the fact that the private sector is very much a part of this equation. And Shariffah, you can also answer this question. Do you feel that the private sector is taking cybersecurity seriously enough? And what do you think your role can be to help them take this trend more seriously, if they aren't? Well, I'd like to start with you now, Hisham. And also, what kind of new technologies and capabilities do we have to watch out for? Because it changes, you know. Now we have more machine learning and AI-based attacks. And I mean, we have cryptocurrency concerns. We have the dark web, which is pretty much a part of our world right now. You know, where codes can be exchanged and all kinds of things can be exchanged and deals can be made there. And it's very hard to keep track. And not just for the nation, but for the private sector as well. So what kind of new technology, how has technology changed the cybersecurity horizon in the last few years, and what can we do about it?
Well, that's a very difficult question, I would say. But the thing is, I think what we need to look at here is the whole defense ecosystem. You see, yes, you know, much being said, technology changes, and then there's always a better technology. Yeah? So I think conceptually that applies on all aspects, not just cyber. Yeah. So in fact, well, you know, even ships or tanks or aircrafts, you know, so everyone would want the latest technology. But then again, from the defense angle, is that, as I said, you know, what we need to really focus on is really the whole system. So here is back to I like to go back to our strategy, the defense strategy itself, which will mobilize the whole of government and the whole society. In the end, conceptually, is that, you know, so capitalizing resources that you have. So we did not fear of the change of technology, and so as long as we have that structure in place, meaning like you could capitalize on resources you have. So this was not possible probably before this, because the defense policy itself was done in a very discreet, or rather more secret in nature, as compared to now when we have defense white paper, and we expect that, we're explicitly saying that, you know, there are role to play by the society and there are role to play by the whole of government. So I think so long as we keep that intact, and then we continue to basically propagate that, we will not have any problem, regardless of how advanced technology can be. So, but you're right, you know, that will always remain a concern. But well, on the strategic look, you know, as I said earlier, you know, we are developing forces that would be very tech savvy. Yeah, that's the future force we're looking at. and we'll be investing a lot more on R&D. So all this actually requires a mobilization of the whole society. So that's why now, since we have the white paper, the Defense Ministry has been talking to many, across the board, the government, very easily as compared to how we were probably 5 or 10 years ago.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shariffah.
Thank you.
About the private sector.
If I think there are two questions actually when you ask.
Yeah.
One is about is Malaysian private sector taking cybersecurity risks seriously enough, and also how technology actually changed the landscape of cybersecurity. So I will try to answer the first question first. I think the short answer is depends, because private sectors here are varies depending where and which sector they come from. If one private sector, the private sector that we mentioned here, comes from a sector that is highly regulated, for example, and there are elements of dollar and cents in that. For example, the finance, banking, communication and multimedia, even energy, where if anything happened to that environment, it will kill people. So all those things, the regulations in parts of making sure the safety of their sector is something has been embedded in their rules and regulation. So they actually do risk assessment to invest in terms of finances, technology, as well as providing talent, because some of it is very, very niche to specific sector that they are looking at. However, to look into and another part is private sector is profit making, meaning that they will know what asset they need to protect, and in this regard, most of their assets somehow being reside in cyber environment. Hence, they have no choice but to put the right resources in terms of people, as well as skills, as well as money, so that they can protect their asset. So, however, there are also private sector that might not see how cybersecurity actually how they should protect themselves, or they are outside of the supply chain of the cybersecurity environment, or any other industry that requires high regulation in terms of safety and security. So there are both sides of it. So if I may go to the next questions, how is technology actually changed cybersecurity? I think.
And what kind of technologies?
What kind of technology?
Yes.
Okay, we always know that technology is double sword. Okay, when you talk about AI will bring benefit in terms of cybersecurity. Actually, they can actually reduce the number of incident handler. A lot of things can be automated and can be detected. At the same time, AI also can be used by the offender or the people who have the criminals to do some other things in terms of gaining their objective in terms of proceeding with their agenda. So in terms of technology wise, regardless any technologies that come now and future, I believe it will always reside in cyber environment. So the problems that we are facing 20 years back, we still face today. So the most important thing for us, regardless whatever technology, is to understand your environment, what technology that you are using, and you need to harden your environment. It is not one size fits all. That's why a continuous risk assessment needs to be done. And the most important thing is to put a cybersecurity baseline in your organization. And in this regard, if you talk at national level, the Malaysian cybersecurity strategy, together with all other strategies that should be complement to put a national cybersecurity baseline on how you should practice and use technology securely. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've actually now started receiving questions from the floor. So officially, I'd like to open the Q&A to our audience. Got one here from Mustafa Hanefa. And I think this goes for two Malaysian speakers here. Either one. I think this is basically you, Encik or Hisham. How do you think we should future-proof our national defense and commercial cyber crimes? How future-proof is our defense against the latest technology developments, including very high artificial intelligence is just one, but there's also quantum computing that's coming in, right? So the technologies available to us have evolved, and how future-proof are we for these developments? And how, because technology is always changing, how do we make sure that we are always future-proof? Sir, I think you've been muted. Yeah, you're back on.
Thank you. Very excellent question. Well, as I said earlier, there will always be changes in technology, but what we need to understand is like what Shariffah said, you understand what exactly is the threat here, yeah? And being from defense, you still carry out those, as I said, either traditional or non-traditional. There will always be issues of human trafficking or drug trafficking. So technology just makes it, makes it easier for the perpetrators, and also makes it easier for us to probably overcome this challenge.
Double-edged.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. But what's important is actually, as long as you have that ecosystem working, like what is outlined in the white paper, that MIDAS, with other agencies must cooperate. So like for now, under this COVID situation, we just recently set up the National Task Force, which is being led by the three main security agencies, which is the armed forces, and then the Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency, and then the police, and together with other 15 security-related agencies. So these sort of things that needs to be, I would say, continually enhanced. So as long as we have this cooperation, I think we could navigate the future challenges. So it's all back to about working together and getting things coordinated. So we don't have to be so jumpy over or fear of what's coming ahead. What you need is actually a solid and consolidated defense system, which encompassing the whole of government, especially, and the whole society. So gone were the days where only government knows what's right. Yeah? And like you have said it, now we're thinking of mobilizing even the private sectors, and as we speak now, in fact, the ministry is working on the future national defense and security industry policy.
Okay.
Yeah. So that will, in fact, we'll mobilize. We try to get companies, all these defense and security related companies, to be more committed, and to be more of a relation of a not just business to government relation. We want to raise that to a more partnership relations, that where sense of responsibility will be a lot higher. So if we have our way, if I have my way, I would like an act to be in fact drafted so that we are in a way we're governed by a certain act. We could do that, So I think so long as we because defending the nation basically requires that high sense of responsibility towards it. So that's what the defense white paper has said. That shared responsibility between government and the whole society.
Okay, Thank you, sir.
Mr. Asohan.
Yes.
If I may add one important thing that I think I totally forgot to put in, and I don't think we discussed much in this just touch base. One thing I think the most important things that we really need to recognize, especially in terms of managing cybersecurity at the national level and future, is regardless how a government that usually looks into how to produce a policy, and especially in security environment, where in order for security agency to move forward in terms of how you want to protect the sovereignty of our nations, we actually relies on how intelligence, how rich our intelligence information is, and how confident we are with the threat. In cyber environment, the important things of us to make a decision relies on the capability of us not only to understand what our threats are physically, we also need to understand and have the technical skills in terms of handling all the information in terms of collecting threats. Meaning that for a country like Malaysia and any other countries, in order for you to produce a concrete policies, a concrete an informative or a constructive laws and legislation, you need to understand your threat. So to do that, you need technology. So technology is one part. Technology will assist you to collect the information and have the biggest threat visibilities. However, the most important things in terms of cybersecurity is the skills of the people, meaning that you need to have the right people to do this. It doesn't matter whether it comes from the government or the private sector. You need to recognize, because even in cybersecurity per se, there are different niche technical capabilities and skills that needs to be there in order for you to understand. And exactly. And in order to do that, it goes back to, if you want to talk about security pathway, where you talk about sovereignty and security, you need to do the attribution, where an attack from a state, how confident you are it comes from a state-sponsored attack, or in technical technical environment or economic environment, how confirm you are that attack come from these particular sources. How are you going to prosecute if you talk about a crime? So having said that, regardless how many resources that you have, you really need to invest in terms of people and let your people stay there and actually create a pathway for them to be specialized and professional, as well as increase their skill in the niche particular field.
You brought up one very interesting area, and I'd like to go to Alex for that, because, you know, unfortunately, he's the guy from the UN. State.
I think Alex is on mute, yeah.
That? Sorry, yeah. Sorry, exactly. I muted myself. Yeah, so since you brought up state-sponsored, I'd like to go to Alex. State-sponsored terrorism, since you're the guy from the UN, can you tell us how does the UN act to, you know, basically protect the rest of the world from state-sponsored terrorism? Is it a big problem? What are you guys doing around this area? Because some of those states are your members as well, member countries. How do you handle it from a UN perspective?
Exactly. No, that's a really great question, and I think that, you know, to put it short, I think that, you know, as you mentioned, you know, majority of countries, if not all countries, are members of the UN, right? So the UN, in the end, it's the sum of all its members, right? The UN is not this, you know, I don't know, supra-governmental institution that just, you know, descended from, you know, outer space and just imposes its will.
You're not the world government, yes.
So we're basically, you know, all the countries will combine. This is what the UN is, right? So when we have issues between the states itself, then it's sometimes hard for the UN to kind of step in and sort it out, because in the end the UN is sum of all its members. So the UN, as I said, through its kind of peacekeeping mandate and other mandates, tries to get all the countries around the table to discuss and to have express their points and have discussions around these issues. So that's why it's very important. I mean, we can't impose, okay, you should stop doing that, or you should do this or that. But what we can do is offer kind of an environment where everybody can come together and we can foster, the diplomatic resolution rather than, the armed resolution. So that's why we have many different organisms and different mechanisms to do that, like, the UN Security Council, or of course the General Assembly. So, there are resolutions passed that, okay, we as member states should act in a certain way. But then again, these are not legally binding for the states, right? So then the states can act whatever way they feel like it in the end. But if they are parties to these conventions and to these discussions, they are encouraged to act a certain way, right? And then, of course, the UN can come together and say, okay, these countries constantly, acting in a way that kind of contravenes these norms that we all agreed to. So then we can all take measures towards that country. But that means you need to have sort of a, majority of thought throughout the countries around the world to have such a measure, right? So I think a lot of times it comes down to the diplomatic power that the UN has, to bring all the states together and to seek to have these conversations and to agree on norms.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So we've actually run out of time, but I'm going to leave it to Kristi to wrap up and also tell us about, I mean, we brought up, but we didn't really identify what are the new technologies that you think we should be really, really watching out for, and how do you respond to it in terms of having that good offense, or rather the good defense that's an offense.
Well, thank you for the last word. I'll keep it brief. I think in terms of new technologies, I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that as much as there's new things coming, it's actually important to keep in mind the old, because for criminal law enforcement in the field that I work in, what we're looking at is motive. What is motivating somebody? Is it to make money? Is it to gather intelligence? Is it to cause harm to somebody? It doesn't matter what technology you're using. If you go after the motivation, that's how we tend to catch the criminals. So I think that's one key thing to keep in mind, is not be so focused on what's the latest technology, but what is the motivation behind the actions. In terms of new technologies, I mean, the key things that are the topic of the day that we're dealing with on a daily basis globally, obviously, are ransomware and ransomware as a service being sold on the dark web itself being utilized for multiple different crimes, and then cryptocurrency being used to try to hide the payment for the criminal activity, which, lucky for us, has all of those transactions are recorded on the blockchain. And as investigators around the world are getting pretty good at tracking those. So I think, and Alex and I both work very closely in this area to constantly work globally on trying to build capacity in that area, because it's something that we're seeing on a regular basis.
So we're back. In the connected world, being connected is very important across jurisdictions. Okay, thank you, panelists. I'm sorry for going above our time. I'd like to thank everyone and for taking this time off, from various countries as well. And I'll leave you back to Mira, who will close off the session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having this discussion. Very, very educational.
Thank you.
Thank you.